finally, I think the other big issue we'll see, and this has been a perennial issue since the law was passed, is the issue of money. How much money should be appropriated, how much money should be part of the law, how much additional money should go into it, and whether we need additional programs. There's certainly lots of differences on those issues as well. The big point, though, is that there are a lot of big, complicated, complex policy decisions that need to get waded through, which again I think makes 2009 difficult for reauthorization because these are complicated things. I mean, it's really going from, to graduate level education when you think about growth models for accountability and measuring individual student progress, when you're talking about differentiating interventions between schools that are just missing AYP and those that are missing by a whole lot. A couple of other issues for you on charters related specifically. Dean and Jim will get into some of the details on the individual programs. On a broad level, Rahm Emanuel from Illinois has introduced some legislation to provide some additional funding to create charter schools when schools have been underperforming after a certain period of time under NCLB. And I think that there's some interest in these issues of how do we create more charter schools or more new schools that are that are very similar to charter schools, but maybe not necessarily fitting the traditional profile of a charter school. When do those happen? Are they going to be a consequence of accountability? Is there going to be funding tied to them? But I do think there's a lot of interest around this notion of how do we bring in innovative school designs? How do we bring in additional new schools into the mix when you have a traditionally underperforming district or a cluster of traditionally underperforming schools? Talking fast, trying to move quickly. So what has the department done while we've been working on reauthorization? We have two major initiatives underway. One is a regulatory package, and the comment period for that regulatory package is closing today. So if you're going to get in comments, do it today. They cover the gamut. There's a whole wide range of regulations that are in this package. They cover everything from graduation rates to supplemental educational services and public school choice to restructuring, and there's some other issues in there as well. We are trying to move forward in some areas where we felt like there was statutory authority as well as some clarity that needed to be provided in terms of our current regulations. Our timeline for finalizing those regulations is later this fall. And so some of these regulations will impact this coming school year, so 08-09. Other regulations will affect 09-10. There's nothing in there that's specific to charter schools, but again, to the extent that charter schools are affected by restructuring, for example, or are measuring graduation rates, there are specific issues that affect all public schools. So if you haven't looked at the regulations or you'd like to get more details on those, I strongly encourage you to look at what's being proposed and weigh in, even if it's today and you only have a few minutes. I know some of the national associations will be weighing in. Real quickly on graduation rates, what we're proposing there is that schools move to what's called the NGA rate, or the National Governors Association definition of graduation rate, by the 2012-2013 school year, and that be used for reporting and for accountability purposes. And then it gets really complicated, and I could spend the next half an hour sort of explaining what happens between now and then. But graduation rates would still be continued to use for accountability, but the NGA rate wouldn't be required until 2012-2013. Pilots. Pilots are where we've provided states some flexibility to do some different things under the law. So the first one we did a couple years ago were growth models, which means measuring individual student level growth and having that be counted under the adequate yearly progress definitions under NCLB. We have 9 states that are currently approved. We just extended approvals to 2 additional states, Michigan and Missouri. So we'll be up to 11 states that are using individual student growth as part of their adequate yearly progress definitions. We also opened it up to all 50 states. So prior to this year, only 10 states were able to apply and be approved. We opened it up to all 50 this year. We had a number of states come in, but only 2 states were able to get approval through our peer review process. This spring, we announced a differentiated accountability pilot, which is just a fancy way of saying a different way of intervening in low-performing schools, or schools that are not as low-performing and just missed their accountability targets. As you may be aware, that the law treats any school that doesn't make adequate yearly progress the same way. So this is a way to allow states to differentiate how they're going to intervene in their schools that are not making adequate yearly progress. We have had a peer review, and we are recommending some approvals to the Secretary. She's reviewing those right now. We hope to have announcements on which states will participate in this pilot, hopefully by the beginning of July, so right before July 4th. That could slip a little, but we want states to be approved in time to implement these in the 08-09 school year. And we had some good proposals from states. I think we have more room to go on what these interventions look like, how they can be truly differentiated between the lowest performing schools, schools that have missed 6, 7, 8 years by 20, 30 percentage points, and schools that may be missing by one subgroup and have only missed for a couple of years, and how do you handle those two situations differently? And then finally, we have a couple of pilots to allow states to do things with supplemental services and public school choice. I'm going on a bit long, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on those. If you're interested, please come on up and ask me afterwards. Two other things that we've undertaken specific to charter schools and specific to the Office of Innovation and Improvement. In May, we had a National Charter School Policy Forum, first of its kind gathering where we had some of the leading minds in academia, practitioners, Dean, who else did we have? Philanthropy, et cetera, for all phases of the charter school, sort of creation, operation, et cetera. And we talked a lot about quality. What does quality look like? How do we create it? How do we sustain quality? What does the infrastructure of improvement look like if the charter school needs to improve? How do we support that charter school? And then finally, what do we do if there isn't quality at the charter school level? How do we resolve that issue, including if we need to shut down charter schools? So we had a great discussion around that, and our intention is to put out a white paper later this summer that goes through some of the issues that we talked about at the forum, as well as looking at some of the research and some of the best practices there. And then finally, this is an idea that is something that we're working on. Dean and I have been talking quite a bit, and we've talked with a lot of folks here about how do we create a National Charter School Achievement Award that recognizes really two phases of charter school quality, both how much growth did a charter school have as well as absolute achievement. And then let's go find them, let's recognize them. It's similar to, but a little different from, the Blue Ribbon Schools program that the department currently runs. So we're in the design phase, so if you have ideas about how we could best identify the highest performing charter schools and what that looks like, we're open to suggestions, but we want to push forward with a recognition for the highest performing charter schools nationally. And as they say, look for more on this in the future because we're in the design phase of that. But everyone's excited to do that and really recognize that there truly are some break-the-mold charter schools, and we need to do this on an annual basis in a very high-profile way. And that leads us to Jim. So thank you for your time, and Jim will talk to you about charter school facilities.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim House. I'm the director of the Charter School Facility Grant Program at the U.S. Department of Education. And we actually have two different charter school facility programs at the U.S. Department of Education. You might ask yourself, well, why would you need to have two of them? And the reason is they're designed to address different types of barriers that charter schools have with obtaining facilities. The first program I'm going to discuss is the State Charter School Facility Incentive Grants Program. And this program exists because charter schools, on average, receive less funding on a per-pupil basis than traditional public schools. And part of the reason why this is likely taking place is that oftentimes when people think of what it costs to educate a child, they think of operating expenditures. But capital costs are typically about 10% of the cost of educating children in the U.S. The second program I'm going to describe for you is the Credit Enhancement for Charter School Facilities program. And this program exists because lenders and investors tend to perceive charter schools as being relatively risky borrowers. And the reason why they perceive charter schools to be this way is charter schools risk having their charter revoked at pretty much any time